Welcome to the Vision Quest video series, a step-by-step guide to holistic health. This program will discuss astrology. My name is Linda McKenzie, and I was a data communications engineer for 14 years. I had my own data communications consulting company, and I designed Fortune 1000 companies. And I've been psychic since I'm 8 years old. And about 2.5 years ago, God asked me to switch. And so I've started a new company called Creative Health and Spirit, and we deal in alternative medicine and awareness. In this film, we'll outline the use of the horoscope and personality. It will give you the ancient origins of astrology, how to read a chart, and even the astrology for medical issues.
Astrology is a method of correlating events on the Earth with the positions of the planets in order to explain the importance of these events and to predict future ones. Astrologers believe that earthly events are timed by the cycles of the Sun, Moon, planets, and other celestial bodies such as asteroids and comets. Each of these bodies are associated with a particular event or situation. For instance, the planet Mars is thought by astrologers to be connected with matters of initiative, disruption, social groups, engineers, surgeons, or soldiers. Interestingly enough, the 2-year cycle of Mars around the Earth coincides with the standard length of posting in the armed forces in many countries, such as the United Kingdom. Such coincidences are commonly used in astrology to verify not only future predictions, but when such coincidences are likely to happen.
It's actually hard to describe because it's a whole perception of reality, or a whole philosophy that feels that the universe is one entity and only one, and that all the star systems, the galaxies, the great tides and washes of energy flows that are in this universe are all part of that entity. So astrology therefore feels that everything in the universe is connected to everything else. And there's a philosophy that is encapsulated best in as above, so below. What is in the bigger reaches of the universe is manifested on Earth and in humans, and right down to the smallest atom. So the nearest philosophy that approaches astrology is physics, which tends to think along the same lines. Now, because of that, astrology itself can encompass very vast fields of thought, as well as very small, minute fields of thought. And the astrology nowadays is mostly used as a tool for personal understanding and personal consulting. But it can, of course, very accurately be used to time important events, to heal, to run a nation, to do so many things. The mind boggles. Mine's gone blank, actually. There's all kinds of branches of astrology that all are connected to the different ways of using it.
I guess it's the cycles of the planets that show us the movement of the time. And I mean, you can go to the big cycle of the whole zodiac, which is the sun going through the passage of the year, going through from Aries on the 21st of March through to Pisces at the end of the year, and it goes right through the circle of the zodiac. It shows us an unfolding. It shows us the seasons, although in the southern hemisphere we do have a bit of stuff around that, which makes it very interesting because we seem to flip, because here we don't have Aries at the beginning of spring. So it's always a tough one for us to work out here in the southern hemisphere. I have an interesting little theory about that, why that doesn't work, that I've heard from an Australian named John Diamond. He said he believed that our magnetic resonance is with the northern hemisphere and not actually with the south. And so I think that we're still aligning ourselves with the north, even though our spring doesn't start at in March. It starts in September. So it doesn't really go with the zodiac the way it's supposed to, but I don't think we've aligned ourselves to the southern hemisphere yet, and I think that answers a number of people's questions about the southern hemisphere. Eventually I think we'll align ourselves with the southern hemisphere, and it'd be interesting then to see if our zodiac flips. if you're born in the month of Aries, you may be more Libran than you are Aries when we finally take that on. Well, there's several different styles. The most common two styles are the sidereal, which is the Indian zodiac, which goes on the actual position of where the constellations are at the moment, which is another chestnut we have in astrology, where the astronomers say, oh yes, but the constellations aren't where the astrologers say they are, they've moved on. There's been a precession. And so the siderealists, who are the Hindu astrologers, they take it from where it actually is at the moment. But the Indian astrologers, I find, it's a lot more fatalistic. It's a lot more to do with how rich you're going to be, what type of job you're going to have. It doesn't appear to be as humanistic. It seems more fatalistic. The humanistic type of astrology that we practice largely in the West has a lot more to do with the psychodynamics of the individual. But there are other forms of there are other uses of astrology. There are uses of financial astrology, horary astrology to answer questions. There's lots of different applications for astrology, and I think it's only really limited by your imagination, but you can use it for a lot of different things.
Medical astrology?
Medical astrology, yeah, thanks, yeah. Medical astrology is very useful. A lot of people really enjoy doing that. There's quite a few people practicing medical astrology. It can show you clues to areas of the body toxicity and weakness in the body. It's very interesting. I studied it for a year, but my problem was I didn't understand a lot about the body, so I steer clear of that. But I do understand some about that. But when they talked about the endocrine system or something like that, I'm not really au fait with what that means. So I stick to my humanistic astrology, which is more about the individual, the personality.
Astrology seems to have first been used in ancient Mesopotamia, where it was practiced by priests who concerned themselves with the prediction of major events. By classical times, however, Greek and Chaldean mathematicians began using astrology to determine the characters, personality, and traits of ordinary people. Today, modern astrologers have combined the two arts to provide a very accurate system of classification between the Earth and the celestial bodies.
If you study any civilization anywhere in the world, there's astrology. Way, way back in the far reaches of the past, you find astrology. Going back about as far as we know to the Sumerian civilization, there's a very vast body of astrological knowledge. Even in the most primitive cultures in the world, there is a form of astrology. So people really aren't sure how we discovered the understanding of astrology and how it works on Earth. Many people feel that it was taught to us by beings from other parts of the universe. Some people feel that we evolved the knowledge ourselves in very far past times, but nobody can state certainly that such and such happened. It's a bit of a mystery. But it's like the study of medicine. How did that begin? Many, many, many thousands of years ago, when somebody realised a herb stopped a pain. So perhaps many, many, many thousands of years ago, somebody realised that when a certain planet was in a certain spot in the sky, certain things happened regularly, and they took it from there. Nobody can be sure, though.
Astrologers typically use a horoscope, which is an accurate diagram of the positions of the Sun, Moon and planets Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune and Pluto. In the horoscope, the planets are believed to be the motive forces influencing people, groups, forces, drives and emotions in everyday life. A birth chart, for example, provides a symbolic picture of the position of the planets at the time of birth, observed from the location of birth. One important factor of the birth chart is the ascendant, which is the sign occupying the eastern horizon at birth. The ascendant is believed to show the personality of an individual.
The horoscope is a map of the heavens at the time an individual is born. The respective positions of the planets in the zodiac reflect different elements and circumstances of our lives. The different planets, for example, the sun, relate to our basic willpower, our drive. The moon relate to our instinctive reactions, our emotions. Mercury relates to our intellect, our communication. Venus, our pleasurable instincts, our social life. Mars relates to the active impulse, our physical drives. Jupiter, our expansive elements such as philosophy, religion and spiritual evolution. Saturn indicates our limitations, our tests and trials in life, but also it has something to say about our professional directions. The outer planets are more generational and relate to large numbers of people, but can sometimes have an influence on us individually. These planets are Uranus, which has to do with our inspiration, our change. Neptune, which is again our ideals and spirituality. And Pluto, which is a very revolutionary planet in action, indicates the elements in our life which have to be removed for growth to take place.
In horoscopes, astrologers also use the commonly known zodiac signs, which add information about the nature of the planets in them. These include Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. Astrologers segregate the horoscope into divisions known as houses, in which both the planets and signs are located. These include the first house, the second house, the third house, the fourth house, the fifth house, the sixth house, the seventh house, the eighth house, the ninth house, the 10th house, the 11th house, and the 12th house. The planets, besides being placed in certain signs and houses, are also modified by their relationship to each other. For instance, if a planet is a certain number of degrees away from another, it may either be easy or difficult to coincide with that other planet, because of the energies of the two planets are either attracting or pulling in different directions. The horoscope provides an astrologer with a very detailed diagram of all the celestial influences on a particular individual. For instance, the planet Jupiter in the sign of Aries in the 5th house indicates success and the expansion of understanding by the planet Jupiter, from a vigorous and enterprising attitude from the sign of Aries, and from a creative or recreational source indicated by the 5th house.
When you come to see an astrologer, they ask you the date, time and place of birth. Now, almost everybody knows their date of birth and their place of birth, but there's all kinds of difficulties when it comes to the time of birth. Huh? Now, from the time of birth, every 4 minutes is important, because when you're getting into the predictive areas of astrology, each 4 minutes equals a year. So you can be up to about a year out, or no, not up to, at least a year out or more, if you haven't got an exact time of birth. Even so, for some people it's impossible for them to find an exact time of birth. You can still do a general reading that's pretty interesting, that fits anyone born on that day. Huh? But it's not going to be anything like the level of accuracy as it would be if you got an exact time of birth. With an exact time of birth for a personal reading, you can look at the degrees, and astrologers have divvied up all the degrees in the zodiac. And each of the degrees have specific meanings and a specific orientation to life. So if you've got an exact time of birth, you can be amazingly accurate. Huh? both about that person and what's going to happen in that year that they come to see you. But if you don't have that time of birth accurate within 4 minutes or so, the further wrong it is, the less accurate you're going to be. Yeah?
There are numerous applications of astrology which include psychological astrology, which blends the concepts of astrology to those of psychology or psychotherapy in the aim of determining the psyche of an individual. Natal horoscopes, which use the moment of birth and is concerned with an individual's talents, liabilities, characteristics, relationships, and life situations. Honorary charts, which use the positions of the planets and signs to determine specific questions in the past, present, or future. Synastry, or the comparison of the charts of two people in the aim of better understanding their relationship to one another. Mundane astrology, which is used to determine political, economic, or domestic events. And event charts, using the horoscope to determine the occurrence of a particular event, whether it be physical or mental. Astrologers may also use the horoscope to outline the space within an individual's home, as used in the Chinese therapy Feng Shui, in medicine, for corporate decisions, or in astrocartography, which is the application of astrology to the landscape.
People come for a number of reasons. They come from personal problems, business readings, relationship problems, sometimes fertility problems, quite often health areas. And we can determine from the chart when those difficulties have been activated and give excellent advice on what's going on, when, for how long. So we can tell them when it started, we can tell them when it's due to finish, we can give them excellent advice on how to handle the problem in the meantime, according to our skill. So if it's a medical astrologer, they'll give them medical advice. I'm a GP, so I give practical advice through observation and personal experience and experience of other clients who've had the same difficulties and how they resolved them. So it's a very valuable area, that personal astrology.
When we know that the tide's in, we can cast our nets and get fish, but astrology can tell us when the tide's not in, and so it's no use walking down the pier and casting the net because you're not going to catch anything. Astrology will give us an indication of when things are going to work for us and when they're not, basically. It does many other things besides that, of course, though. It can really outline potentiality. It's very much about potentiality. It's very much about self-awareness, finding out about who we are.
And perhaps follow the pattern of the cold reserve period and withdraw right into yourself. But this won't satisfy you. The client who came to see me came about a very agonisingly deep personal problem, which was to do about family, marriage, and his whole relating orientation. So he was consulting me about a personal difficulty, and I was giving him a reading specifically on that difficulty. Now, he didn't come in and tell me what the difficulty was. He was asking me to see it from his chart, and so I was reading it from his chart. I was accurately reading it from his chart. So I gave him advice about what was being activated, and advice about how I felt would be a really good way to manage the energies and handle them. What we didn't have in the reading, but what would have occurred as we finished, I would have been telling him to when the problems would be over. Now, when an energy stops, it stops, and whatever you've set in motion on that time continues to roll along in your life until that energy gets activated again in another cycle. So it's very important to give the client accurate advice to improve life, which is what that orientation was for. You're going through again another very interesting energy which is the completion of one cycle of your destiny and the beginning of another cycle of destiny. And you will find, as that's been activated throughout all the year too, that you will be ending old friendships and making new friendships that are going to be part of the next 6 or so years of your life. And that will be quite helpful in giving you a different perspective or a clearer view of what's going on.
This is the chart of Jessica. Jessica's a Taurus. There's her sun up there, sun in Taurus. It's in the 10th house. It's on the cusp of the 11th house. She's a very ambitious young lady. She's only 11 and a half, but she's already showing her ambition. The sun up at the top of the chart like that often indicates somebody who has lots of ambition, and she's displaying it early on in life. She has Gemini rising. The rising sign is always shown at 9 o'clock on the chart. Gemini rising indicates a child who's very bright and quick, thinks a lot, sometimes jumps too quickly from one activity to another, always gregarious, always lots of fun to be with, and they can tend to be a practical joker, Gemini rising. The rising sign is the same as the ascendant, or the cusp of the first house. You might hear those terms being used. She has also the moon in Virgo down here in the 3rd house, which actually lends itself very much to the same thing as the Gemini rising. The moon in the 3rd house is, again, a chatty personality, very bright, loves the intellectual mind, loves their friends, loves to hang out with lots of friends. The 3rd house is the house of brothers and sisters and neighbours. She loves to chat all the time with these people. It's in Virgo as well, so she's a bit nitpicky. She's always been nitpicky and fussy, but it allows her the application of doing her schoolwork very nicely. Moon in Virgo. She looks after her school books really nicely. School's very important to a child like this, with the moon in the 3rd in Virgo and Gemini rising. She takes her schoolwork very seriously and loves it, but she always has to have her interest sparked with the ascendant in Gemini. It's very important for her to be always interested in what she's doing. The other planets are here. She's got the Mercury in Taurus, Mars in Taurus, both in the 11th house, which lends itself to this real need to be with lots of people. The 11th house is about friends and associates. Jessica has Mars and Mercury in Taurus also in the 11th house, which gives her a very freedom-loving and friendship-loving nature. So this is backed up by the whole chart. But sometimes she's not sure about her friendship. She has Venus in Gemini here in the 12th, and sometimes she feels that her friends are undermining her or sabotaging her. It's often actually a reflection of her own psyche. It's not necessarily so that the children are doing that, but that's just a real test for Jessica, is that Venus in the 12th house there. Her Venus is opposing Jupiter and Uranus over here in the 6th house, which is also another test for Jessica, and that she has to be kept interested in her friends. She has to feel an interest from her friends and with her friends. She likes exciting people. She doesn't like boring people or people who don't keep up with her rapid pace. She has Neptune on the descendant here, which can give her a very dreamy quality. She loves myths. She loves to read about archetypal stories. She loves fairy stories. What I see in the future for Jessie is a lot of creativity. She is very, very creative with the Gemini rising and the moon in the 3rd, with Neptune on the descendant, and the Jupiter, Uranus opposing the Venus. She's extremely creative, and she's definitely got a leaning towards the arts and towards acting, and she takes this very seriously, and she has a lot of ambition around that. I feel that with the work put in, she can really achieve a great deal in her life. She needs to stay interested in what she's doing. That's the major pitfall for Jessie. If she's not kept interested in what she's doing, she can lose interest and stop just when she could make a success of it. That's one of the major challenges for her. If she sticks with a project and goes for it and doesn't allow herself to be sidestepped, the way Gemini risings tend to be, if she uses her Taurus capacity to stay doggedly at something, she could really rise to the top in her profession, which will definitely have something to do with the arts. She'll always be a caring child, or always be a caring person, who looks after people, with the moon in Virgo in the 3rd. and she'll always be respected for being very caring and sincere. Her pitfalls are sticking at something. Also, another thing that Jessica has to be careful of is that she doesn't idealise people, because they will tend to fall off their pedestal, and she will be hurt with her relationships with people if she does that. She must learn to see people plainly and clearly, and through her life she'll have several opportunities, sometimes painful, for learning these lessons. There will be a lot to learn about relationships with people. There will be a lot to learn about her possibilities in life, because just sometimes when she feels very strong about actually getting out there and doing things, a little subconscious voice will come in and sabotage her, so she has to get past doing that.
Astrology can be used in business in quite a few different ways. Firstly, take for example the employment of individuals for specific jobs. Astrology can be used in this way to determine whether or not the person applying for a job is in fact suitable and capable of doing that job in the best possible way. It can be used for formulating marketing trends. So where money is being spent in marketing, astrology can help determine which periods of the year are suitable for spending money and which areas this money is best spent. In office situations, we find certain people are better suited to working with other people, especially where we have large numbers of people working on one project. Which person is going to work best with another person? This is called synastry. Astrology looks at which temperaments can actually maximize their energy to get the best results in a working situation. And finally, especially now with the emergence of Asian markets in world business, astrology can actually be used to instruct us how to do business with Asian business people who've long held an interest in numerology, astrology, building offices in an astrological manner. This can enhance our manner of doing business with Asian markets. Corporate astrology is much, much more intricate in that it applies to the combination of people. If on an individual level a person comes for a reading, we're simply talking about this individual and what is happening to that person in their life. Corporate astrology involves a lot of complicated factors. Bosses working with employees, employees and bosses working with clients, timing of contracts. So it is a far more complex type of astrology involving a lot more factors. As an example of people that have used corporate astrology, we might look to a large corporation that was wanting to do business in Korea. They were finding it difficult to secure the business because of the numbers that were used on the contracts. It came to their attention that these contracts weren't being accepted because the Korean counterparts found these numbers quite inauspicious. As soon as we instructed the executives of this company as to which numbers were useful, which numbers were detrimental in doing business with this organisation overseas, the results were forthcoming. They were then able to proceed and to satisfy their counterparts in the Asian country. Well, the facial characteristics also relate back to astrology, and in a corporate sense, this is one area that is also very, very useful to establish the nature, temperament, and also professional aptitude of a person. There are 4 different characteristics in the use of face reading. Again, these are linked to the astrological and palmistry elements that you may be aware of. The first type is what we call the lunarian or endomorph. This person is normally round-faced, fleshy, thick-lipped, and very, very social in temperament. Second type is what we call the ectomorph. This person is observed or recognized by a very frail frame, an inverted triangular face, which indicates the nervous or mental temperament that this person possesses. The third type is what we call the ligamentous type. These are the square facial types, strong muscular disposition. These are the active types, the physical types, the footballers or the soldiers of the world. And finally, we have what we call the mesomorph. The face is rather oblong in disposition, a bony temperament. These are the hard workers, the people that work well into the late hours when everyone else has gone home. So these are the four temperaments, and these are how you can recognize them.
Do they change from men to women?
Women are a little more difficult to identify, but they do, if you are careful enough to observe, exhibit similar traits as do the masculine temperaments.
Medical astrology is probably one of the more interesting, because you can indeed diagnose what's wrong with a person by using astrology if you're skilled in the subject. You can't do it if you're not skilled. And there are many astrologers that make it a specific field of study. They spend only time on that. But you can indeed diagnose, and you can suggest remedies for healing and the times for healing. And one of the things that astrology has got far above any other form of healing is knowing when a certain treatment will work and when it won't, when even the same treatment may be harmful, particularly with operations. You know, there are times when operations are definitely harmful and dangerous to the body, and at times when it can be quite beneficial. And astrology can very, very clearly tell you this. So medicine, herbal areas, naturopathy, homeopathy, have all used astrology in the past and are still doing so. You would be surprised at the number of allopathic medical doctors that use a little astrology on the side to know when the treatments for their patients will work the best.
Political astrology follows the same sort of lines as business or economic astrology, with the exception that political astrology also looks at the birth of the nation. Just as in normal personal astrology, we look at the birth time of an individual, political astrology looks at the birth time of a nation. So in Australia's case, for example, we would look at the date the Constitution was formed and study the cycles of Australia along with the political leaders to get an insight into the major changes that are going to occur in the history of the nation.
In my practice in South Australia, I was very well known as an astrologer there, and the number of politician secretaries that turned up at my doorstep at election time was phenomenal. Now, the politicians wouldn't, they just couldn't be known as, you know, but their secretaries would. I'd get every party and an awful lot of politician secretaries turning up. So politicians regularly use astrologers secretly, and Reagan is the only one who dared go public about it. But he's certainly not a minority. Businesses, if they find an astrologer who can predict accurately, they will consistently work with that astrologer. They tend to work with several astrologers. And it's not only astrology, they will use highly skilled psychics as well. Businessmen will use anything that will make them money, as will businesswomen. And astrologers make them money.
There was one gentleman that came some time ago, and he was having a very hard time with life. He was feeling very, he was feeling like he was really invisible and very nebulous, and there was nothing going on in his life. He was finding it very hard to get ahead. a very creative person that wasn't being taken notice of by business at all, and he was really on the edge. He could have had a nervous breakdown. But when he knew that this was part of a cyclic unfolding for him, and he was actually meant to go within to pull into himself to find his creative centre and learn more about his inner life, he felt much better. And when he did that, things started to work better for him in the external. I advised him that Jupiter was going to be opening things up for him, and so he waited. And when the Jupiter came through, then he was no longer felt invisible, and he was able to go out and do the things that he wanted. And because he knew that there was a time coming when it would actually work, he was quietly working at his creative project without being upset by the fact that nobody was taking any notice of him. He could do it behind the scene and well up his creative forces for when there was an outlet for it. And trying to push against the ocean when the tide's not there for you is a silly thing to do. And a lot of people do that. You'll observe people doing that. They just have bad day after bad day after bad day. And astrology can provide a map of that.
It's astonishing how accurate astrology is. Most of my clients, and the clients of any good astrologer, wander out with their jaw dropping down to the ground, because they really weren't expecting that level of detail and that level of accuracy. These are not just superstitious people that come to see astrologers now. My and many other astrologers have clienteles who are astronomers, who are supposed to be our greatest enemy, physicists, teachers, psychologists, doctors, as well as the other general runs of humanity. We usually have a lot of artists, musicians, people who feel so they can understand how astrology works. I've had 3 or 4 psychiatrists as clients, a number of psychologists. I've had a lot of highly technical people, computer experts, real estate people. We get an enormous range and spectrum of people who are clients of astrologers.
Astrology can outline character and characteristics very well. It can really pinpoint a lot of things that you may not even have been aware of in yourself. We often mask things from ourselves, and the astrologer sometimes can unearth things that you may not have even really considered about yourself. Saturn conjunct the Sun, for instance, can indicate that there were problems with the father, that they didn't ever get any recognition from the father, and so then as the person grows up, that may indicate that they feel that they're not really efficient in their lives and they can't really make anything of their lives because they didn't have a good father figure in the background there. If they learn to flip that around, they can actually be really hard workers and people that can achieve a great deal in life. But they need to understand to let go of an inferiority situation that can be happening there from the Saturn Sun. So the astrology can map that and show us our potentials there. I mean, some of that can be born out of just common sense, but the astrology is a very accurate map for self-awareness.
About 1,000 years ago, the Roman Catholic Church made a big push for power, and was most successful. Now, what they did at that time was feel that they should have control over the minds and thoughts and bodies of everybody. They felt that they had the right to do this because of their spiritual beliefs. And of course, one of the types of people they targeted were as astrologers. Anybody who would think for themselves, who could perceive the truth for themselves, who were self-reliant and who weren't depending on some god to tell them what to do, they went for. So one of the people they targeted to destroy was astrologers. And they actually drove astrologers underground, and many astrologers and others like them who were targeted by this religion sort of disappeared into the fairgrounds where they were free. Any area where they weren't going to be oppressed, gypsies, fairgrounds and all those areas. And in a lot of the times the only way they could practice their art science was through these subcultures. Now, as the oppression lifted, as the Roman Catholic Church and its offshoots power slowly diminished. The oppression of astrologers lifted as well. They just didn't have the power to do it anymore. And of course many other people too. And the astrologers started to make their voice heard again. But because they had to function through subcultures and fairgrounds and so on, its first appearance was as fortune-telling. It's never lost its ability to give wisdom in many, many areas of life. But it manifested in Western culture as fortune-telling as its first shoot up from the oppressive times that astrologers had undergone. And actually I have tremendous admiration for those older astrologers because they kept the art science alive in tremendous detail, wrote, even though they could have got killed for writing what they wrote, and passed it down for generation after generation, the basics of our knowledge. So now, when we're able to be free again, we have the basics, the building blocks that we can build our wisdom on and our knowledge on more. And that oppression was actually an advantage because we lost our rigid way of thinking and started to see how it could work with a lot more flexibility. And because of that, we're now aware of how it works in vaster ways than those earlier astrologers ever were.
Some people believe that astrology is just a crutch, that it's something that we can use to escape from the realities of our lives, when it's actually exactly the opposite. It's something we can use to find out what the realities of our lives are, what the possibilities are. We often shield ourselves from the good things in ourselves because we aren't very good at taking on the good parts of ourselves, and astrology will outline those and really make them come up for us, for self-awareness, for understanding. Other misconceptions are that, well, a lot of people think it's just the horoscope that you read in the paper and there's nothing, absolutely nothing more to do with it. Another misconception is that people say that, say, Scorpios and Libras shouldn't be together because they may have read it in some horoscope book that only does sun sign stuff. And that's absolutely not true at all, because the Libran person will probably have Mercury and possibly have Mercury and Venus in Scorpio and really understand the Scorpio, and vice versa. The Scorpio could have Libran planets because they're so close to each other. Mercury and Venus can never be very far from the Sun. So what sign the Sun is in, you know, you get along with the signs that are next to you but on both sides. But in a lot of the books they say that. Don't go out, a Gemini shouldn't go out with a Cancer. Well, they might have, the Gemini might have lots of Cancer planets, and so they'd get along quite fine with Cancerians. So, a misconception is to place massive generalities on astrology, because it's a lot more complicated than that.
The most important feature of astrology, I must emphasise, is not its use as a fortune-telling aid. Astrology, palmistry, face reading, all of these related topics are primarily designed to give human beings an insight into their nature, their spiritual nature, their destiny as beings, and their destiny as individuals to produce and to provide a creative service to the world around them. Astrology is basically looking at the potential of a human being, what that person can become, the person's ability to overcome the inner weaknesses and to grow and to develop. In this way, the future can be determined from an understanding of character. But if we resign ourselves to astrology as simply a fortune-telling tool, then we become fatalists. We, in a way, don't develop as human beings. For this reason, the primary use of astrology is spiritual.
It's a fairly difficult profession to do because the law doesn't recognise our skills. And that will do, I think, over the next 20 years or so. But at the moment it doesn't. And it's still fashionable to consider astrologers as weirdos, way out superstitious people or con people. And there are some astrologers that are con people, but usually they haven't studied for long and they don't have a lot of qualifications. So the precautions an astrologer should take is being very careful of how they present information to their client, to make sure that the client understands that it's the astrologer's perception of their energy, not necessarily exactly the way it works. And each astrologer, according to their own nature and bias, will have a certain perception on how things work. Okay? And that it's not going to be 100% accurate. It's not. Right? You can't be 100% accurate. There are too many factors, little factors, that interfere. But as I said before, a good astrologer is usually aiming at around 80% accuracy, and they usually get it, and you can get higher than that. And also, another precaution an astrologer must take is showing the client that it is their own energy that the astrologer is talking about, and teaching the client how to take responsibility for their own lives. They can't give, a lot of people who feel weak or helpless want to give the astrologer the power over their lives and have the astrologer tell them exactly what to do and when. Now that's going to make a very inferior human being if you allow them to do that. So a good astrologer will show them what the energy is, how it works, how it reacts with them, and what to do about it. Now my clients, the clients of mine who come because they're weak and helpless and unhappy and feel no inner strength in their lives, I train them. It takes them about 5 years to understand how the energies feel and how they react to it and take control of their lives, and they do. And by that stage, after about 5 years, they very rarely need to see me on a regular basis, and they tend to contact me when there are major crises in their life.
You need to be careful that you don't sow negative seeds in the minds of people, and also to make sure that people use astrology as a hand-in-glove tool. People shouldn't resign themselves completely to one tool or another. Astrology is no less a tool than understanding the economics of your business. It is a tool that should be used hand in glove so that you can maximise the understanding you have in other areas of life.
It's very individualistic. You know, it depends on the person that's here, how I handle that. Sometimes you feel that if they're very strong people and they say to you several times, I can handle what you're saying to me, you don't have to hold back. I quite often have people saying that to me. So if you can gauge that they actually really mean that they want to hear what's really going on, and you see a very difficult time coming up, say for their marriage, and then you can see that, you know, you quiz them about that, how the marriage is going. If there are problems in the marriage, then you can outline that yes, there's a difficult time coming up, but this is what it feels like, this is what the difficult time looks like, this is what the colour of it is. So then we'll leave knowing that there's a difficult time coming up in the marriage, but they've got tools for being able to fix it up. They can make intelligent decisions on whether they want to, you know, blindly go down the road of just letting the marriage split up, or actually working on the marriage with the tools that they have of self-knowledge.
I censor myself, I think. I look at the client and feel what I should tell or what I shouldn't. Now, I have had clients come and want to know when they're going to die, for various reasons. I had a client who thought he was going to die when he was 35, and when I questioned him, he said his father had, his grandfather had, and his great-grandfather had died when he was very young, but they didn't know whether it was 35 or not. So obviously he was going to die when he was 35. Well, I had a look at his chart, and there were fairly great upheavals shown in the chart that could have meant death. I said to him, it's possible, but this energy can be used in a different way. You can do such and such with it. And if I think, my judgment is if you do this, you won't die. You will transform your life radically. So I said, I'll give it a go. He didn't want to die at 35. He gave it a go. Now I think he's about 47. still trotting along very happily. Huh? He did do what I suggested. Some other clients, I've had people come who suspect they have cancer or a brain tumour, and they're not being told by their family or their doctor whether they're terminally ill. They want to know if they're likely to die in about a year because they want to get their affairs in order. Now, I have to use my own judgment there. I will say it's a difficult period. I would advise getting affairs in order. It is possible. Or you are not, I can sometimes categorically say, the first age that you could possibly die at is 54. And if you do change yourself in that period, the next age is 76. Everybody has periods in their life where they could die or make major changes. So I usually make that really clear to the client.
Medical astrology as yet hasn't taken off quite as much as palmistry. Obviously palmistry is relevant to the physical body of the person and is more apt to be used as a diagnostic tool. Medical astrology is as effective, however. I remember a story of a great astrologer in India who would sit high up in a room there, and he would have this large bell downstairs. Whenever a sick person would come, they would simply ring the bell. By the time the person would walk up the stairs to the office of this old astrologer, he would already have the diagnosis and the mixture in mind for this person. The time that a person gets ill is reflected in the positions of the planets at that time, and the planets can actually tell us what disorders or diseases are prevalent at that time.
We have, I would think, some around 2 or 3% of medical doctors that are interested in and use astrology, but they will keep their mouths shut because they don't want to be scorned by their peers or abused by their peers. Medical doctors are virulent in their prejudice and abuse of astrologers at the moment. Again, I think that will change as they gradually realise how effective it can be.
A useful thing for people to watch is the moon. With the moon's going through certain signs, some people won't have access to when the moon is in a sign, but you can get calendars that tell you what signs the moon's in, and it can be really fascinating to watch how your mood changes through the days. Another really useful tip is to not ever start anything just before the new moon. If you're starting a business or want to do anything that's got to have some life in it, that's going to have some future, it's never a good idea to start it just before the new moon. It's the period of the dark moon, and a lot of things just don't take off. There's no energy behind it. The best time is the time between the new moon and the full moon because the energy is building.
If we're not overrun by radical, fanatical belief systems, either scientific or religious, the future is going to be tremendous. Astrology can show you how a child should be trained, when is the best time to learn things, how a child is developing, their natural skills and abilities. So in the educational areas, over the next 20 to 50 years, I expect to see it being applied very well. Because many of the alternative healers who have become so popular because their healing work works, can and do use astrology regularly to determine the right times for healing and the times not to interfere with the way the body works and so on. So I expect astrology to become very prominent in those areas over the next 50 to 100 years. In general living, more and more people will realise there are cycles of living, that in certain periods of their life they have certain cyclic developmental ways of being, and they will effectively use astrologers regularly for life guidance. Because it's so accurate, all astrologers have to do is overcome the extreme prejudice of religions and science. It's unwarranted prejudice, it's true prejudice, because they condemn without knowledge. Now once that's overcome and people can see how valuable it is and how much fuller it can make your life, they'll flock more and more, as they're doing now.
For me, the future of astrology is this expanding self-awareness that's happening on the planet now, especially in the Western countries. We're looking for answers to the questions of who we are and where we fit in and what we're going to do with our lives. We're expanding our spirituality, and astrology can really help with that. So many people are turning to astrology. I think people will continue to turn to astrology. I think it will become more accepted. I think there's a bit of a spiritual crisis coming up over the next few years with Pluto going into Sagittarius. I think organised religion is going to have a very big testing period, and I think people will be looking more to New Age type of things. Now, I don't consider astrology to be part of the New Age, but it's not really separate from the New Age in many people's minds. So it's because astrology's been around for thousands of years, it's been there for a long time, but it really can help us in our spiritual leanings towards the future to bring out the sides of ourselves that are very useful to know. It can provide us with an understanding of where we're going in the future in terms of our technology, in terms of social events, movements of humanity. It can help us with all of that.
I believe astrology and its future are quite strong in becoming more and more prevalent, especially in the business arena and the political sphere. In fact, to date, it's not a well-known fact that astrology has been used in a lot of these areas, but because of the stigma attached to it, it hasn't openly been admitted. I believe it is currently being used in a lot of governmental and corporate areas, but the future of astrology is such that it will become more and more accepted, not so much more and more used. It is becoming more and more used, it is becoming more prevalent, but I still feel it is being used quite a lot now and will become more openly admitted in these conservative areas.
Astrology can provide a very accurate character analysis of ourselves. Through celestial signs and detailed charts, astrology can also provide a unique and detailed depiction of the past, present and future influences which surround us in our daily lives.